Stay tuned for Legal Straight Talk here on Long Island Cablevision Channel 20.
Okay, I need my kaleidoscope of colors to lead the way. I'm riding in my car and I'm coming on around the bend. It's a chase, this twisted race, I'll be on top again. Gonna be the whole 9 yards or nothing.
Truth. That's key. When you're dealing with, as an attorney, I need my client to tell me the truth. Welcome to Legal Straight Talk. This is Brett Harrison from the Harrison Law Group, and today we have a special guest from the Hediotti Law Group, Sylvia Ayass, who specializes in immigration law. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thank you, Brett.
I'm excited about today's show because immigration is a hot topic.
It is. It's very controversial right now.
Okay, I'm just going to jump right into the immigration. Okay. One of the things that you hear about all the time is everyone's so fearful of immigration, the changing laws, and a lot of it's just misunderstanding. Many people say, we don't want more immigrants coming here because they're taking all our jobs, they don't pay taxes, and all we do is keep paying. All the citizens here, people here legally, they just paying for everybody that's here illegally.
I hear that all the time, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. Definitely, I think with the new laws that are being passed, it has everything to do with accountability and making sure that the immigrants are paying taxes and making sure they don't have criminal records, keeping a safer, cleaner United States.
Well, okay, let me take a step back. Are the immigrants that are here illegally, is it true or not true? None of them pay taxes, and they can't legally pay taxes.
It's not true.
Why?
It's not true because you don't need a social security number to pay taxes. You can get what's called a TIN number, and in my experience, most of my clients have always paid taxes. And not only do they pay taxes out of the kindness of their heart, but typically for any sort of immigration relief, you usually need about 5 years worth of taxes, if not sometimes 10, to even qualify for immigration relief.
So you're saying then by having the TIN, should down the road, and we'll get into this, down the road you apply or there's new exceptions that come in, one of the things that seems to be consistent with all the different talks in Congress and the Senate and the President and executive orders is this concept of taxes. So that's very key about essentially working on the books and paying both federal and state taxes.
Absolutely. In fact, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which doesn't give a green card to illegal immigrants who are children, but it actually just allows them to work. And with the ability to work comes a social security number, comes the ability to pay taxes. Secondly, under the executive order that was issued by Obama in November of last year, the biggest thing is 5 years worth of taxes. If you haven't paid 5 years worth, you have to pay 5 years worth of back taxes, and so forth. They're going to be able to pay taxes in the future.
Now, what about the concept that, you know, we talked off air before we started today, where we said, you know, a lot of people's fear is that they're taking over. There's a scarcity of jobs as it is. The unemployment rate's not where everybody wants it to be. There's such a fear that the illegal immigrants are taking over all the jobs. Is that true or not true from what you've seen and read?
That's not true. I think it's fair to be scared. You know, there's going to be a whole new pool of people working. But what I've noticed is actually the unemployment rate. Okay, well, let's step a second back. So Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals gave basically work authorization to children who are 16 years of age and older in 2012. Since 2012, our unemployment rate has actually gone down over 2%. It's between 2 and 3%. So statistically, I don't know where people are getting this information.
So it's more of a fear.
Definitely.
Or it could be a political game between whatever side you're on or not on, or
Right.
whichever house.
But I don't even think it has to be political. I mean, people want a low unemployment rate, and actually giving work authorization to illegal immigrants will do that.
Not to get political, but let's be real now. You know as well as I do, whichever side can use immigration to their advantage, with 2016 being a presidential election.
Absolutely.
You know it's always done, and you act on people's fear.
Of course, but at the same time, you know, Jeb Bush is definitely a contender in Florida, and, you know, he's going for the Latino vote. So we'll see what happens with immigration.
Well, and that's important, too, because now a lot of people say with Obama, he won the Latino vote. So,
Not necessarily. I think they wanted him to do more, but we're waiting for Congress to act.
no, I'm saying initially in the last election.
Oh, right.
A lot of times people say he won the election because he had the Latino vote, which is no longer a minority in this country.
No, not at all. Not at all. And that is true. You're right. So
Now let's move forward to actually, we'll take away the political stuff.
Right.
Okay. Let's start with something I think is important.
Okay.
When a client comes into you
Okay.
and they say, you know, I really need to adjust my immigration status, or I want to get my green card, I want to get a temporary student visa or something.
Right.
Can you explain the importance of, one of the first questions you ask is, how are you here? And what exactly does that mean?
Okay, so people come to this country in a million different ways. Some people flee persecution. For example, there were a lot of children who fled the past year, like they came by the thousands, just fleeing wars.
Could be like, for example, like Syria, Iran,
Absolutely.
Afghanistan, Iraq, or let's say over the last number of years.
Exactly. So we have that way of entering, which is called entering without inspection. Means you just enter without status. You come to the border and you say, like, hi, I want asylum, or you just sneak on over, whatever it is.
When you say asylum, you're saying, I'm fearful of going back? For you or your family or both?
It could be both. You're fearing persecution, and it's actually very complicated and difficult to obtain.
It's got to be legitimate.
Absolutely. You need documentation. You actually are put in removal proceedings.
Well, that's a whole other show. That's a whole bunch of evidence and so forth.
So, yeah, so you can enter without status.
Okay, that's one way.
That's one way. And it actually presents more difficulties in trying to get status in the future. Or you can enter legally. So on a tourist visa, or if you have a fiance, for example, someone petitioned for you to come and enter the country. That's another way of entering. So there's several different ways. You either enter without status or with status.
Okay, then another way is totally illegally.
Right,
Coming
which is
through
without
the port.
status.
That's without, okay. Now, the way you come into the country, does that affect the options that you have as an attorney?
Absolutely. For example, if you enter without any status, and say you meet a wonderful Prince Charming.
When you say without status, let's go past the. Let's not talk the
Legal.
legal talk.
Okay.
Let's just talk common sense.
Okay,
You're
so
saying when
you
come
sneak
here,
on through the border.
Okay, that's
You come
fine.
in, you pass the Rio Grande, you just walk on through. No one detects you. So when you just enter the country without any papers, and say you fall in love, that does not necessarily will confer to you any ability to get a green card.
So you're saying just because you, quote unquote, fell in love,
Right.
and now you want to get married, that's not a surefire way to say, okay, good, married, here's my green card,
Absolutely
I can permanently
not.
stay.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about immigration is, you know, immigrants can flood the gates, come, have babies, get married, and get green cards. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it's funny that you say that because a lot of things that I hear and see, and when people come to the office, they say, well, I went to an immigration service, and they told me if I get married.
Yeah,
Now, I
I hear
want
that
to talk
too.
about an immigration service and an attorney. Can you explain to people that aren't familiar the quote-unquote immigration service?
Of course, and this is something actually I speak about all the time at churches or organizations. It's very important that, well, first of all, immigrants are a very vulnerable community, right? They don't always speak English, they don't have a lot of resources, things like that. So they go to people within their community who are not attorneys, who do not have licenses, and they pay them cash, it's always cash, and they file cryptic paperwork in their name. And it can really ruin their ability to move on forward in this country.
Now, my experience from conversations, from sitting in the office, is that a lot of times when you're interviewing somebody, you say, have you filed any paperwork?
Yes.
And you always ask that more than once.
Yes, because sometimes they don't even know the answer.
Because most people that go to these immigration services, a lot of times, they just, and a lot of these immigration services are also tax services or travel agents.
Travel agents.
They're quote-unquote travel agents.
Right. And
So they're not attorneys.
they are not attorneys. And
So they prey basically on, because they speak the language, and if they're Hispanic, if they're Russian, if they're Chinese,
absolutely, it's
Korean,
very
whatever
common.
it may be, they'd say, well, come on, you know, I understand you, you
Well,
understand
not only
me.
that, but they usually charge a very small fee. And it's not that an immigration attorney has to be expensive to be good, but it's usually not, in proportion to the work. So you want a green card, it's really rare that you're going to pay them like $75, $300, something like that. And the other thing is you need to have a basis for a work card. You need to have a basis for a green card. So you can't just apply without any documentation and then a green card magically shows up
So
to
there
your
are
door.
times when people come into the office for you and you speak with them,
Yes.
that you say, you know what, I don't have a basis. I don't have a basis in which to apply.
Yes.
And so you don't always take everything that walks in the door.
No. And unfortunately, because of the ways the laws are structured, we don't take a lot of people who walk in through our door. And we give them the same warnings, beware of notarios or travel agents or whatever they're called in certain communities.
Notarios are just notaries.
They're notaries. They don't even have to be notary publics. They just call themselves
So
that.
they don't necessarily even have training in immigration.
They have no training.
A lot of times they're just filling out a piece of paper.
Yes, without checking them. Sometimes even they use social security numbers of other people, which creates this snowball effect of your inability to apply for any sort of relief in the future.
What are the consequences to these notarios or immigration services, these non-lawyers? Is there any consequence?
None. They don't have a license, so they're not accountable to anyone.
Like an attorney would be.
Right. So, for example, I'm an attorney, so I shouldn't be advertising this, but if a client's upset with me, they can go and complain to the state bar. Those notarios don't have that. Secondly, I've noticed that they don't have, a corporate name or anything like that. They pay cash and they disappear.
They don't have insurance.
They definitely don't have insurance. I'll tell you that.
And there's not a group like in this case, New York State Bar or California State Bar that monitors them.
No, it's basically...
There's no sense of ethics and client responsibility.
No, and most of the time they don't even have contracts with their clients. We have a contract. It doesn't matter how small...
You mean a retainer?
Oh, excuse me, yeah, a retainer with the client. Doesn't matter how small, the job is. Every single time, everything is documented for our protection and the protection of our clients.
Now, an important thing that you mentioned, I just want to go back to it, to me, is you said a lot of times these immigration services fill out papers.
Yes.
These papers are so critical.
They are.
You can't be inaccurate.
No, and when the client signs, they're swearing under penalty of perjury that everything contained in that form is accurate and correct.
Like what type of things could affect you if, let's say you make a mistake or the notario, the immigration service makes a mistake. Can you just say, oh, mail another form and say, oh, by the way, we just made a mistake.
No.
Here's actually the corrected form. We didn't look.
No, not at all. Actually, for example, say there's a question, have you ever been removed, which means deported from the United States? And you check no, because, the notario didn't care to ask, or they knew and they didn't want to answer it correctly. And you apply for a certain form of relief. You're not eligible. They could put you in deportation proceedings.
Or because you filled out...
You check one box that was wrong.
Well, let's say they say, have you ever applied before?
And you check
And you
no.
say, you know what, I'm just going to put no because they'll never figure it out. They won't know. Now, what happens then?
It's not, they will always find out. What happens is in immigration, they actually do something called fingerprinting. And so every time you apply for something, there's like a centralized system and they check your fingerprints. And you actually won't be eligible for any form of relief in the future unless you actually do the fingerprints. So even if you use a different name, a different social, anything like that, they're bound to know.
Now, do they ask you on the form, are you known as any other name?
Yes.
I don't just mean if you were married and this is your former name. They're checking to see, did you apply on
aliases.
They call it aliases.
Yes,
okay.
they do. And typically having an alias isn't a big deal under most circumstances, but say, you had contact with immigration officials and you lied and gave a fake name, for example, that could really affect your case.
Well, let's say, for example, you came here when you were 7 with your family. Mm-hmm. Your family came here legally. You came here initially legally.
Okay.
But unbeknownst to you, as a 7-year-old, your parents got a different date of birth and social security number.
Right.
Like things they've done, let's say, in the past, a lot of people would do that so their kids can come into the country.
Right.
Now, that was when the kid was 7. The Patriot Act didn't come into play for what? It had to be only a number of years now.
Right.
I don't know how many years.
I believe
Probably
it was like since 2011.
Since 2011, or 9 or 10, what have you. So you were able to get licenses, you were getting everything. Now, all of a sudden, it's now 2012, 2013, you're now 25. You were unaware that really was not your date of birth or your social security number.
Right.
So whether your parents bought it or however they may have gotten it. Mm-hmm. Now, you apply, you put your social security number, it's now cross-referenced with the Homeland Security and immigration. Now, all of a sudden, it says there's a hold.
Right.
On your license, but more importantly, you now have what are the potential consequences?
Well, the big thing is that you never want to misrepresent anything to
But you didn't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, luckily there are some safeguards in place. There's definitely certain laws that treat children differently in terms of their mindset, in terms of their knowledge of what they're filing, as opposed to an adult.
But now, can you get your parents in trouble? Let's say they're not citizens at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, then they would have made misrepresentations to immigration. However, that doesn't mean that it's always the end of the road. There are things called waivers, which basically it's like saying, I'm sorry, immigration, please forgive me. But they're very hard to get.
Who's going to, as a child, and from a child to an adult, who's going to want to say, oh, don't worry, I'll turn my parents in and we'll ask for forgiveness? Not many, because
no.
They read the horror stories.
You don't have to turn your parents in.
Isn't that what essentially you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is that it could potentially get you in trouble, or it could also potentially preclude people from obtaining other forms of relief. So say your parents misrepresented to immigration, maybe they can't get citizenship now. However,
are they going to be thrown out of the country?
No, not necessarily.
If they have a permanent resident card?
Well, what could happen is if immigration finds out that they lied on their applications and the basis of their green card application was fraudulent, they could rescind the green card, or what they could do is put them in deportation proceedings. There's a lot of issues in terms of how much longer they
Again,
waited.
I don't know too many children who are now adults that are willing to take that chance.
Right.
That's
but
a
the thing is,
slippery
if you
slope.
apply without knowing,
right,
then you're not really taking a chance. I mean, it's something that kind of happens. But like I said, there's always several different ways to maneuver the immigration system. It's never this is the end of the line. But what I can tell you is that immigration's very tough on criminal convictions. So that's something that you want to be very careful with.
Okay, and for a criminal conviction and immigration, for purpose of immigration, could be two different avenues. I mean, criminal law and criminal conviction has a different effect criminally than it may have on an immigration proceeding.
Absolutely, and actually, any admissions made in court, things like that. So even if you are an illegal immigrant, or even if you have a legal permanent resident status, it's very important. If you get arrested, you go to family court for domestic violence issues, anything like that, don't just hire any criminal lawyer. Make sure that they have, a background in immigration or they can pair up with an immigration attorney.
They tell you to consult.
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, I think there's a Supreme Court case, Padilla, now requires...
But the thing is, Padilla requires the judge to let you know that any plea that you take
could have criminal consequences.
Correct. However, that's all they say, and typically the immigrants, they don't speak Spanish, or they don't speak English, they're not knowledgeable, they're not educated. So they say, okay, sure, just I don't want to go to jail.
No, but it's even better than that. They're up in front of a judge taking a plea. So now they're up front, everyone's behind them. They're going to be nervous in front of a judge.
Yes.
Has your attorney explained everything? And they're going to turn to their attorney, and they're going to say yes, with maybe not even really being yes.
That's correct.
So they get nervous, which is natural. Anybody in front of a court would be. So they're going to say yes.
So I guess my biggest advice is always make sure that you speak with either a criminal lawyer who has a background in immigration and or will consult and work with an immigration attorney.
Okay. Now the next question I want to get to, I know a lot of times when you're speaking with a client, one of the next questions you ask them is, well, what country are you from? Why do you care? I don't mean to be mean, but people are going to say, "Why, do you have a problem with this person's from this country?" Or
No.
there's a reason you're asking that.
It's very specific. Actually, depending on what country you're from, could actually determine what kind of relief you are eligible for. For example, the way you brought up Syria. Syria is a perfect example. If it's a war-torn country or there's some sort of persecution, A, you can apply for asylum. Or B, there's humanitarian relief for countries that suffered
Right.
economic or environmental disasters or things like that, like wars, such as Syria. It's called temporary protected status. It's limited in nature and scope, but essentially you have protection from deportation if you register within a certain amount of time.
Permanently, or do you have to
No,
reapply
you need to reapply, and they can.
How often is that?
It's about every 2 years.
So you get in. Let's say you're from Syria, or let's even say Venezuela, I would imagine would be a country that would qualify.
Right. Venezuela has it. Each country, I can't recite all of them, but each country has a different registration period, and they might have closed. But right now I know Syria's registration period is open.
So you get in under that.
Mm-hmm. You get work
Under,
authorization.
what do you call it? TPS,
TPS.
temporary protective
Mm-hmm.
status. Then in 2 years, you have to reapply.
Yeah, you basically renew.
It's just renewing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you forget to renew, could that have consequences?
Absolutely. You can be, well, they're not really, like, immigration's not out seeking deportations, but if you get caught by immigration, say you get arrested, something like that, then you can be put in deportation.
I've heard of people that are past they were originally here on TPS. Let's say they were from El Salvador,
Mm-hmm.
which I believe at one point
Did have TPS.
TPS
Yes.
because of issues and
Mm-hmm.
wartime and so forth. They were here. They were supposed to reapply within that 2-year period. They got a traffic infraction. I think it was tinted windows and a stop sign, what have
Right.
you. They got this summons, or they got a summons to appear in court.
Right.
They then go to court, like they're supposed to, and we're prepared to do what needed to be done, talk to the prosecutor, the village town prosecutor.
Right.
All of a sudden, the judge said, well, we have an ICE hold on you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? And how is that possible? This is over, the guy got stopped for tinted windows and passing a stop sign. He didn't kill anybody.
No.
It happens.
But that's
now
the
the guy
biggest
got hold.
misconception. That's the biggest misconception about immigration is that, criminals can run free and it's really easy to just be an illegal immigrant and commit crimes, and it's not true. Actually,
Why does this guy have an ICE? All of a sudden, he's told, that's it, you have an ICE hold. And explain, what is ICE?
ICE is essentially Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're a part of the Department of Homeland Security. Homeland Security is like this big umbrella. And under the Department of Homeland Security is ICE. There's USCIS, which basically processes green cards and, citizenship, things like that. When you're under ICE, there's an issue. Immigration's trying to deport you, or there's some sort of removal proceeding.
Let me start. Well, how they first get you then is what you're saying is that basically you got these tickets. When it was run through the court,
Mm-hmm.
Department of Homeland Security or the Patriot Act realizes, whoop, this person, based on their name, date of birth, and what have you.
Yeah, typically they fingerprint.
And their fingerprints,
Mm-hmm.
which is not just federally now it's run through all the states and cross-reference.
Right.
They see there's a hold.
Right.
They don't care whether it's a ticket or whatever. All they know is that you did not reapply timely, therefore there's an issue.
Right.
And when there's a hold, does that mean this poor guy or woman
Mm-hmm.
is now going to be taken into custody, arguably?
Arguably. Well, they might not be put. What typically happens is they take you into custody, and if it's something like an infraction, you can show ties to the community, that you've got a family, they'll let you out on bond, So you pay money and they
What
let
does that
you out.
mean?
It's like bail. So they do not typically keep low-level offenders like a ticket infraction in custody because they do keep you in like federal prisons.
Which doesn't always work hand in hand with the state courts and prisons. Am I correct?
No, it does not. So actually,
It's not like they communicate with. They say, okay, let him go.
No. And actually, what I've noticed is, for example, if you're a drug offender,
Right.
you will get taken into custody by the cops. You serve your sentence. You get out on probation. You finish probation successfully. ICE shows up to your door, and then they put you back in custody.
And they say,
Which seems like a waste of resources. I
so
think,
you got to
but-
finish. So let me understand this. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You're following whatever programs, probation officer
You
says.
successfully finish it.
You're finished. You're ready to say, good, I have another month. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, just as you're about to finish,
ICE shows up.
ICE shows up and says, we got to talk to you.
Yep.
We got a new place for you to live.
And so you go back into custody.
And so you're back in for how long?
Well, it depends because there's a huge backlog. Even though if you're in custody, even if you're in deportation proceedings, you get expedited. They tend to move your case.
Does that
a little
mean instead of
faster.
10 years, you'll be done in 2 years? What does it mean?
Yeah, actually, that is what it means.
So on
Immigration
a nonsense
proceedings
thing,
can
you
take,
could
like-
be.
Yeah, you could be there for 2 years.
So why not?
and-
If I'm the one in custody,
Right.
let's say now
They
I
just- Mm-hmm.
finish my probation. Okay. I consult with an attorney. They say, well, even though it seems like you're not going to, based on this type of crime,
Right.
you're probably going to be deported. Why do couldn't I just waive my hearing and say, listen, just put me back in wherever.
Proceedings.
I don't even want to do any more proceedings. I'll waive it and go back to wherever country.
Yeah, it's
Let's say I'm
called-
in Guatemala or wherever I am.
That's called voluntary departure. So you basically voluntarily depart the country, which helps with certain convictions in terms of ever coming back into the United States. But what I can tell you definitely is USCIS, or rather ICE, Department of Homeland Security,
Right.
they are tough on drug offenders. Unless it's a tiny bit of marijuana, you're in a lot of trouble.
But let's say, here I am, and my attorney says, listen, you could be there for 2-3 years. And now let's say I have a family that I got to help support. Let's say I have an older mother or cousin in another country that, based upon what I was doing here in the U.S., and which is not uncommon, I was sending some money home to make sure things were taken care of for
Right.
my family. But now if I'm stuck here in prison, or you don't want to call it prison, I'm sorry, you call it detained. To me, if I don't have freedom and I can't get up, watch cable or whatever I want to do, that's prison. You want to call it something else.
What I see is very common is, these, and they're typically young males, unfortunately, they do take voluntary departure. They just can't deal with being in prison or custody or detained, whatever you want to call it, because a lot of times they're low-level offenders. They had cocaine on them. I'm not excusing their actions, but then they're put in prison.
What if there's an assault? That enough to get them
Yeah.
deported too, is it not?
Right. It's what's typically called an aggravated felony, which precludes you from the majority of relief.
So now this person says, you know what, I don't want to wait. I'll agree to voluntarily
Depart.
deport, because he's saying to himself, I have to support my family.
Right.
And then he says, you know what, I'll come back, however I can come back to work here, whether I go illegally to try to come back in the country,
Right.
which also is no picnic either, trying to come here illegally.
No, it's very difficult.
And there's a lot of sad stories, and we can get into that next time.
Right.
But we only have about a couple of minutes left. So I know we talked a lot about a lot of different things in different ways.
I think we ran the gambit.
But so really then, one of the, I guess we would say is, it's very important to hire or to consult, not necessarily hire, consult with an attorney as opposed to an immigration or notario service,
Right.
because it could have dire consequences to what you put on that form.
Absolutely. And not every attorney is going to be a great attorney. So feel free, go consult with different lawyers.
So when an attorney asks you, how did you come here? Did you come here legally or illegally? It's not because
I'm curious.
I'm curious. Or what country
No.
did you come from? There's strategy involved.
Absolutely. Yes.
So once again, I want to thank you for tuning into Legal Straight Talk. I'd like to thank Channel 20 and Sylvia Ayass.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Take care.
Bye.